Governor Brown is continuing his trade mission in China this weekend. So far, he has signed symbolic agreements on boosting trade between California and China and to help one of the world's most top polluting nations improve its air quality. Mr. Brown also announced a deal with Chinese investors for a major development near Oakland's Jack London Square. And he promoted high-speed rail while riding a bullet train from Beijing to Shanghai. Today, the governor presided over the reopening of California's Trade and Investment Office in Shanghai after 10 years of it being closed. Earlier, I spoke with John Myers, political editor for KXTV News 10. He is covering the trade mission for News 10 and KQED. John Myers, welcome.
Good to be with you, Joshua.
How's Governor Brown doing so far? Is he accomplishing the goals he set out to accomplish?
I think so. I mean, Jerry Brown really had two goals, I would say, on this trade mission here to China. And we're in Shanghai. At this point, we're in the second of the cities that he's visiting. I think those two goals really were long-term and short-term. First, long-term. He wants to create a long-term relationship with China. More economic trade, more investment, more partnerships. He has signed formal agreements with the Chinese national government on economic issues and on environmental issues. And then I think there are short-term goals. The governor is looking for business deals to bring back home. In particular, one that was already announced on this trip about development of the Oakland waterfront, $1.5 billion, getting Chinese investors with the Bay Area group that's putting that together. So he has those two goals. I think he's been pretty successful, but I do think that Jerry Brown is going to measure this in the long term, not the short term, and what kind of economic activity that he can find will increase between China and back home in California.
John, what does China have that California wants, and vice versa? What do we have that China wants?
What China has is it has money to invest. I mean, obviously, this is a country that is a world power that fared better in the economic downturns than most countries around the world. There is a very large, growing middle class here in China that has money, and I think if you're Jerry Brown, you want it in two forms. You want large money for investment projects like the deal we talked about in Oakland, and you want consumerism. You want them to buy California products, whether we're going to be talking about California wine on this trip or rice or other products.
Yeah, he seems to be very good at staying on message and staying away from a whole lot of politicking and pomp and ceremony, which tends to come along with a state visit. How has he dealt with that aspect of being among Chinese government delegates?
Well, he's certainly done very well, I think, with the pomp and circumstance, because that is not that's not a Jerry Brown strong suit. He disdains the trappings of office usually, and he seems to have enjoyed himself. Had a meeting with the premier of China in midweek, and of course all the other officials that he's talked to. As far as issues that maybe others think he should be talking about here, and most notably we're talking about issues in China on human rights issues, or cybersecurity, or piracy of entertainment items. The governor is steering clear of those. He has made a very narrow focus. He wants to talk about economic activity. There have been some criticisms back in California that maybe he should be addressing these issues and maybe talk a little tougher to Chinese officials. But I do think there's a healthy debate there about whether or not the governor would actually achieve anything out of that. And Jerry Brown is a guy at this stage in his life, I think, he turned 75 last week, where he is comfortable doing what he thinks is best and talking about what he wants to talk about.
Now, Governor Brown also traveled on China's high-speed rail system. Not a perfect system. It had a major fatal crash a few years ago, got the railway minister in trouble on corruption charges just this week. But it is a bullet train, and California is angling to build one of its own. How did Governor Brown use that occasion to talk about California's upcoming project?
Well, it was, I think there was a little bit of specific interest on Jerry Brown in riding that high-speed rail train. And then there was the symbolism, of course. I mean, it was a great photo op, right? Jerry Brown is the #1 cheerleader for high-speed rail in California, and he gets this chance to see what a train line is like. We rode from Beijing to Shanghai. It's an 800-mile trip, about a 5.5-hour trip. For people at home, it's the equivalent of going almost from the Oregon border to San Diego on high-speed trains. And the governor had a great time. I mean, he enjoyed himself. He was talking to the engineers from the Chinese company that helped build that train line. He asked them lots of detailed questions. And everywhere he looks in China, and this is really a fascinating thing, Joshua, everywhere that the governor looks and he talks to us, he talks about construction, about progress. And as he said to us on the train, he said, it seems like that we are pondering too much in California. We're navel gazing. We got to get going. We got to start building things. That's the message Jerry Brown seems to be pushing forward out of this trip.
So what happens now? How do we measure the value or the success of this trip?
Well, I think that's a little bit of in the eye of the beholder of what the value is. I mean, there are a couple of things I would point out. First, the trade office here in Shanghai that the state is opening is new and important because we haven't had any international trade offices since 2003. We closed down a number of them across the world. There was a lot of criticism that they were not effective. They weren't a good use of taxpayer dollars. This particular office is going to be funded by private donations organized by the Bay Area Council, the nonprofit business group that organized this trade delegation. So I don't think there'll be a taxpayer dollar issue here about this office in Shanghai, but I do get back to what I said earlier. I think the governor has this long-term interest, and I think that matches up with the Chinese culture too. I mean, as you hear time and again, the Chinese investors, they want to know you. They want to have a relationship, a friendship of some sort before you start talking business. And I think Jerry Brown is perfectly comfortable with setting the markers here that we could measure things in the distance. But as I said, I think it's in the eye of the beholder as to exactly how much more economic activity will come out of a trip like this. But we've got a few more days on it. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
John Myers, political editor for KXTV in Sacramento, joining us from Shanghai. John, 谢谢. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua.